So the Christmas tree, an ancient symbol of ongoingness, even eternal life. As a matter of fact, turns out the Egyptians used it before we did, thousands of years ago. It turns out the Chinese used the evergreen tree because, get it, it doesn't lose its leaves. That's extraordinary. I didn't know we had invented evergreen trees back yet, but we had. And so they used this as an example for ongoingness. And today, too, it's the central image for our Christmas celebration. It's the one thing you could find in some form or another inside of all our houses. The evergreen tree, of course, is also a triangle. And some have said not only is it green, but its triangle shape points to heaven. Others have said not only is it green, but it's a triangle to remind us of the Trinity, which is, I think, just pastors trying too hard, frankly, between you and me. Just settle down, pastors. It's almost Christmas. You're going to be fine. It's a tree and it points to God. Wonderful. I always think of this. Sometime in the 70s, when I was just beyond being a kid, we started fussing about, should we get a fake tree? Because we were doing too much damage to the environment by growing these trees. And since then, we've kind of come to realize, well, wait a minute. It's a crop that's raised specifically for this reason. After we cut them and harvest them, they grind them up and use them for mulch and recycle them, all this kind of stuff. And so, fake or real, I'm sure we'd have a good split in this congregation as well. And now we can go find our fake trees that are made of recycled goods, or assure that when we're done with our fake tree, we'll recycle it. So here we are with, even in death, an ongoingness around this central image of Christmas time, our Christmas tree. The last couple weeks, as we've worked our way through Advent, we started with religious pluralism, the plight of Muslims, especially in our country, and talked about Jesus, our brown hope. Different color, different race, different religion than you and me, calling us to a higher way of being. And we need that especially in this day and age. It's our vocation as Christians. A couple weeks back, we talked about racial injustice. Jesus, our black peace, our black shalom, God's insistence that we lift up the lowly, those who are oppressed. And so is your Christian marching order, utterly wrapped up in the plight of non-whites in our country. And then last week, a fun week about feminism, and our favorite sisters, grandmothers in the faith, Elizabeth and Mary, gathered together to be the first ones to recognize there's something extraordinary happening amongst us, and the rejoicing that comes along with Christmas, of course, for us, is an echo of what we learned first from them. And also, when I think about what we need in this day and age, in December of 2016, hope, peace, and joy, more than ever. So today, love. It's our last week of Advent. We get a full week of Advent, by the way. You should expect a really good sermon Christmas Eve. Normally I have a day, maybe or two, to write that thing. I got a full week to write that Christmas Eve service this year. Very different. And of course, that means you should also expect no sermon Christmas morning. Because we'll be right here next week. But please don't let that be an arguing point when you're deciding Christmas morning. It's, honey, but he's not going to do a sermon. Maybe we just come and celebrate with us Christmas morning lessons and carols. Don't let me be the decider. Isn't it all about love? I've mentioned this before, and it'll happen to you shortly. When you're in that conversation, talking about denominations, about other Presbyterian denominations, or what's the difference between us and your Methodist friend or your Lutheran friends, and you'll start talking about some things, and then someone will say, how about Catholic brothers and sisters? How about Buddhist? And sooner or later, someone will say this sentence, isn't it all about love? That sentence can come out of a profound sense of truth and graciousness. And everyone around the table will recognize that. I guarantee you the next sentence after this will be, I think I could have some more coffee. I think I'll have some more pie. It'll be one of those two sentences. You mark my words. Because this sentence, now I hate to be so unloving, this sentence is also a conversation stopper. It's so true and so empty. It's so true and so diffuse. Yes, who could argue against this? Yes, it's all about love, but where does it go? What does it mean? How can we talk about love in a practical, tangible? Can we put some skin, to borrow incarnational language? Can Can we put some skin on love so it doesn't become just a blanket overlay, often designed, frankly, to reduce conflict, to bring us to the lowest common denominator so we can move on to something important like the Broncos and Patriots. Woo-hoo. I know. Today, love is so important. I thought about this. What if Advent was shortened rather than so long? What if, it's a weird fluke on the calendar. This year, we only get 3 weeks of Advent. I guarantee you we'd take a vote and many would vote, well, we can cut hope. Hope, because that's the prophetic mean passages about justice Don reads. Or peace and shalom. We need that, or some would say, you know what, joy, we're Presbyterians, we don't like getting too wild and demonstrative. We could cut the joy. No one's going to vote to cut love. We finish with love because it is just the biggest and most hard to get a hold of somehow of our Advent weeks. We recognize in our own journey at Genesis that love is in fact the first step. So important for people to feel accepted and warmed before they can maybe start doing some of their own exploration, deciding within the community, before they can decide whether they want to be a part of us, become a camper, belonging, a place where you're feeling loved and some of your questions are answered, and now you decide you can risk subsuming your personal needs for the sake of a community. That's a discipleship step many don't get to. It's hard to get to. And we've even got a couple more steps that we can hardly speak about because we want to encourage others to move beyond Genesis, especially what we teach and preach, where there's a time when all of us need to go off on our own to decide, is it true what Pastor Don says? Is it true what Genesis lifts up? Is it true what Jesus Christ says and what Christendom has said for 2,000 years? There's an important stage that we cannot accompany you on other than to give you language to say, yeah, that's part of the deal. Come back when you're ready to help us redraw the map. Come back when you're headed to help us teach others how they can find a spiritual path, of which there are many and of which we've found a good one and want to share with you. But doesn't it all start with love? Make sure you get, if you haven't already, McLaren's book. Ask for it for Christmas if you don't have it yet, because we've only just started the first 3 chapters. We've been sitting on those 3 chapters. Come January is why I chose the book. Come January, chapter 4 and 5 is really what makes it stand out above all others. And I thought, if we as a congregation could cover this material, it'll make a difference theologically. We just finished chapter 3, which is where he says, isn't it all about love? And some have said in Bible study, that was an easy chapter, but not terribly illuminating. McLaren says this, you got to access your inner hippie. You got to go back to the late 60s and say, isn't it all about love? That impossible, naive optimism that, by the way, changed the world. We've got to get into being a studio of love at the church. McLaren says that's the way, and arguably the rest of his book is fleshing out what he means by this. He says, what I need help with is not coming up with new creeds. What I need help with is not the ideas. I need help loving better, and that's what my community of Christ can give me. The rest of his book, I think, is earth-shattering. It's going to be Christianity you don't recognize, you have a problem with, and you're going to feel helped and encouraged by. But first, can we put an umbrella over the whole affair about love? Listen to what he says about love, including. This is a church he's bragging about. As a community of Jesus followers, we welcome all persons. So far, so good. We love inclusion. Regardless of gender, although already we'd have some things to talk about, wouldn't we, in our black and white thinking. Race, ethnicity, good. Age, physical or mental capacity. What are the implications of that? For, of course, we're good at keeping things wheelchair accessible. Are Don's sermons wheelchair accessible? Is our love accessible to all? Regardless of education, wow. Sexual orientation, regardless of, we welcome everybody, regardless of socioeconomic. That's quite something to say for middle and upper middle class significantly white church, exposed to few others other than who we bring our food for. Or marital status. How many times the church overlooks that, assuming what everyone will find normative. And then this. I want you to listen carefully because this is who we include as being good lovers. But McLaren has a skill set of love that I think you could take the rest of the year preaching on it. We're not going to. I am going to ask you about this list in a few minutes, though, as part of offerings. So that his love isn't too diffuse and idealized, he says, here's what I mean, here's what we teach in the studio of the, I love studio, by the way. He says, or academy of love, which doesn't ring for me, because the love isn't just an academy. Well, unless you think of a musical academy. I love studio because it implies artistry as well as learning. These skills include common courtesies. And I almost stopped reading that paragraph then. I thought, oh please, what are we fourth graders talking manners? Except that what I remembered was in this room and offerings, what we need more than else, some people were saying just a few weeks back, we need some manners. We need to remember some common courtesies, especially when we're online, especially when we're talking to folks about politics. Wow, we have lost some common courtesies. He's calling us back. Gratitude. I love the way our church year begins right at Thanksgiving. I think gratitude could arguably be where you start. Admitting weaknesses and failures. How is that part of love? That goes a long ways beyond what we do in our relationships sometimes. Boy. Self-reporting emotions. And I burst out laughing. I said, oh, Brian, I'm so sorry. Obviously, you've spent significant time in marital counseling. I mean, this, I guarantee you, he has had to be sitting on the opposite side of a couch or a desk in an office. You don't come up with this stuff until, what a skill set about love. Self-reporting, because we don't. We often don't. Why would that be important? I can tell you why it's important if you're talking love. Expressing hurt or disappointment. Men, especially, would like to keep that inside. Confronting and forgiving. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Asking for help. Differing graciously. There's a lesson we need. He has it all under love. Surfacing and negotiating competing desires. That is so technical, and oh yeah, if you don't know how to do that, your most intimate relationships are struggling. Every time you go to, what do you want for dinner? What movie do you want to see tonight? What should we do tomorrow? Taking the first step to resolve conflicts. I love the way he puts that. Guess what? You don't get to negotiate how the conflict's going to unroll. That's the whole point. You do get to be responsible for taking the first steps. That's all you can ever do, as a matter of fact. Upholding wise boundaries. I did a whole sermon series on that this fall. You can't be in a loving relationship unless you know your boundaries and are good at them. And when you're not, you're manipulating, you're expressing on others what's going on inside of you. Trouble. Saying yes and saying no. Winning and losing graciously. Creating win-win outcomes. Wow, it sounds like he's been in a business class now. Speaking truth in love. Profound, speaking truth to power. There's the entire prophetic tradition of our Judeo-Christian tradition. Asking good questions, requesting feedback. Expressing affection, of course. Opening one's heart. Giving gifts. Seeking wise counsel. Be thinking of your favorite of those things, of how we turn love, not just an abstract, isn't it all about love, but here's what I need to learn how to do. All right. Our Luke text today.